Do you wonder if you're the best version of yourself? This is the question we seek to answer in this podcast. We reveal information that helps you recover your health and become resilient. Modern life makes us fragile. Our diet, lifestyle, and environment set us up for failure. We do not accept this. We seek optimization. We strive to become dynamic. So I used to live in Cape Cod in Falmouth. And my college roommate would come down to visit me, Chris Gilligan, my old buddy, and we would sometimes go up to the city together. And the city, it was about an hour and 10-minute bus ride from Falmouth to Boston. And so I remember this particular bus ride, as soon as they turned on the engine of the bus, that hum, I fell asleep. And then we pull into Boston, I wake up right as we're pulling in, he's just staring at me, laughing his ass off. I'm like, what is so funny? It's amazing. You have this ability, I lived with him for years, so he knew me well. This ability to fall asleep like instantly and wake up precisely when you arrive. And it's true. For so long, I had this, what I thought was a superpower. As soon as I fly somewhere, the engine goes on, I was out. I had no problem falling asleep at night. And I just thought I was just lucky. Well, it turns out, no, very unlucky. This is a bad sign if this sounds like you. If you find yourself falling asleep in traffic, that is a bad sign. That is what is called sleep pressure. If you are grossly underslept, you develop a pressure to fall asleep. And when you have this chronically, then this is a sign of sleep apnea. And let me tell you another quick little story. Years ago, before I was diagnosed, and by the way, I've always snored like a banshee for my entire life, really. Even when I was really lean and 7% body fat, I still snored. So just know that you can have apnea and not be obese. Anyway, so years ago, I wake up to find my wife in another room, and this was happening over and over again. And I was like, what's up? Why do you keep sleeping in the other room? It was the snoring. It was so loud she could not sleep. She would always rush to fall asleep and try to beat me before the snoring started. But even still, if that did happen, she would also wake up to the snoring. So she says, you need to see somebody. So I went to see a pulmonologist, which was also kind of funny because he was really abrupt. And he gave me a home study kit, which is really easy, by the way. It just takes one night, a little black box, you put something on your finger and a little nasal cannula, and it records your data throughout the night, and then you submit that back. So then I had a follow-up with him, go into his office, and he's like, yes, you have severe apnea, waking every second. I don't know how that's possible, but I was in the severe case, or a severe end of the spectrum, and he said, this is what I mean by abrupt. He's like, oh, you don't have to do the mask. There's these nasal pillows that fit really nice in your nose. He's like, you got a big nose. So it should feel good on your nose. I just thought that was hilarious. So that's what I use. I've been using that for years. It's a game changer. If you think you have sleep apnea, find out because it'll change your life. Not only was I more well-rested, my wife wakes up next to me now, but I started doing a lot of research about sleep apnea. And, oh, my God, the stuff I uncovered. And you've probably heard some of these things, but you're like, it's probably not that big of a deal. It's a huge deal. Like, if my wife hadn't, done this for me, I don't know if I'd still be here. If you just Google, what does sleep apnea do to you, you get this laundry list of things, such as heart disease, stroke, diabetes, metabolic dysfunction, Alzheimer's and dementia, fatigue, weight gain, oxygen depletion. Well, these are all basically signs of insulin resistance. This all boils down to the same thing. It's insulin resistance, which is diabetes. This is such a huge problem. The biggest problem, I would say, in this country is so many people are pre-diabetic or diabetic and don't know it because our blood markers, our ranges are, I don't think, accurate. So they base a lot of the sort of conventional ranges on sort of a bell curve. So if you consider most of America healthy, then that would make sense, but most of America is not healthy. It's not hard to see that. So insulin resistance affects everything because all of your cells of your body have insulin receptors. So your body has these four main regulators, homeostatic regulators, the things that keep the balance in the body. And that's your temperature, your oxygen and CO2, your pH, and your blood sugars. These are all super tightly regulated. And the blood sugar one has a lot to do with your lifestyle, diet and lifestyle. So when your blood sugar goes high, insulin's secreted by the pancreas, and that pushes the sugar, the glucose, out of the bloodstream into mostly the muscles and liver until it stops responding. If your cells stop responding because the insulin is no longer insulin sensitive, what happens is the opposite. That's what happens in the body. We have all these hormones that are kind of like they pull all the levers in our body, and they have specific roles. And when they stop doing what they're supposed to do, the opposite occurs. For example, insulin is a vasodilator, so it expands the arteries. And if it stops, your cells stop being responsive to insulin, then you go into vasoconstriction. When too much sugar accumulates in the blood, it can make its way into the brain, and boom, you've got type 3 diabetes, otherwise known as Alzheimer's. Okay, so why does sleep apnea cause insulin resistance and diabetes? Well, it's how you breathe. So your breathing is very tightly tied to your nervous system. So when you breathe through your nose, like normal people when they sleep, that is a parasympathetic state. So that's to relax and digest, right? That's how you're supposed to sleep. But with people with apnea, they sleep with their mouth open. That's part of why they have the snoring. That mouth breathing is tied to your sympathetic nervous system. So whenever I watch like sporting events, I'll always watch how the athlete is breathing, and that gives me an idea of how they are mentally and physically doing. If they're like, say you're watching a sprinter and they're mouth breathing versus like I was watching Sha'Carri Richardson, and I don't think I saw her open her mouth once while running. She's all nasal. That's incredible, by the way. But that tells me how conditioned she is, that she's not even in a stress state when doing something like sprinting. Or if I'm watching like an MMA fight, the person who like opens their mouth first and starts breathing out through their mouth tells me who's in a more stressed state and probably is going to lose. So when you are stressed, your body was like, okay, this is an emergency situation, I'm being chased or something like that. So, and you probably need a lot of oxygen, so you're just mouth breathing. So what that does next is cortisol is released. That's the stress hormone. That's good. That it's supposed to do that, but not when you're sleeping. You should be relaxing. Cortisol then takes the sugar from the muscle and liver and pushes it back into the bloodstream because you need immediate energy in an emergency situation. And carbohydrates or glucose are a faster fuel source than pulling energy from fat. So if you've had apnea for 40 years, chances are you're getting insulin resistant, and you now have a metabolic issue. But when you boil it down, metabolism is basically your ability to harness sunlight and turn it into energy. So sunlight goes into plants and fruits, and then either animals or us eat that, and we absorb that energy that was once from the sun. We convert that from what now is stored as sugars or fats back into energy. That's what metabolism really is. So once you become insulin resistant, you now have a metabolic problem. You can't convert glucose as well into energy because that insulin is what pushes it into the cell where the ATP uses it to the mitochondria turn it into ATP. So this is very bad. You don't want metabolic syndrome or diabetes. What are some signs? Well, one sign is getting hangry. So if you are like crashing after meals or you get irritable if you haven't eaten for a while, that's a sign that you have a metabolic dysfunction. That's called metabolic inflexibility. High blood pressure basically is caused by diabetes and insulin resistance. There is something called acanthosis nigricans, which is like dark patches of skin around the armpits, neck, or groin. That's a sign of diabetes. Skin tags. It's one thing if you had them your whole life, but if you've developed skin tags later in life, that's another sign that you're developing diabetes. The best thing, in my opinion, to check to see if you have diabetes is a continuous glucose monitor. But there's markers in blood work that are important to check as well. So glucose is probably the least sensitive marker, unfortunately. But if it's consistently elevated, that's a bad sign. So some of the markers that you should look at is glucose, your hemoglobin A1C, your triglycerides, just a whole lipid panel in general, right? So your lipid profile starts to change. I'm talking about your cholesterol numbers. Starts to change because that is a sign of metabolic dysfunction. And then your insulin levels. And so if you see a functional medicine practitioner, they're going to have different lab ranges than conventional lab ranges. They basically tighten the windows more or less to catch things before they occur. Conventional ranges are there to catch disease when it's already present, whereas functional medicine is going to try to find it before it happens, while you can still do something about it. So let me just go over some ranges that I would be looking for. You want that glucose, fasted glucose, to be between 75 and 85 in the morning. Your A1C, those markers what are considered normal are too high in my opinion. 4.6 to 5.3 is ideal. Look at your triglycerides, right? So carbs turn into fats in the cell, which is triglycerides, when you can't digest them as well. So you want to see that between 50 and 100. And then your insulin, you really want to be between 3 and 7. Also, there's kind of this tricky little thing with HbA1c, hemoglobin A1c. That's an average of how much sugar is on your blood cells. So just like sugar is sticky in real life, it's the same thing inside the body, and it can glycate or stick to your hemoglobin. Now, your blood cells have a lifespan. I can't remember exactly the range, something between 88 days and 120 days. So the healthier you are, the longer they live. And the more unhealthy you are, the quicker they die. So you can have sort of a false negative if you are already sort of diabetic, and if you look at your MCV, that will give you this indication. If your blood cells are dying younger, it'll look like your A1C is lower than it actually is, or let's just say that the marker is no longer sensitive, because the sugar has less opportunity to stick to the blood because they're dying younger. So MCV is mean corpuscular volume. It's the size of your blood cell. Red blood cells start large and get smaller as they age. So it's an inverse measure. So your MCV should be between 85 and 92. And if you're high, if your MCV is above 92, it's a sign that your red blood cells are dying sooner, and that's going to sort of invalidate your A1C. So I mentioned earlier that you have 4 homeostatic regulators of the body, and what's kind of cool is you can if you fix one or improve your ability to be flexible in one of those domains, it'll confer benefit to another one. So, for example, your temperature, right? So we're so used to living in a 74 to 77 degree climate in our climate controlled houses and cars and gyms and whatnot. If you improve your ability to tolerate a greater range of temperature, it actually reduces your blood sugar. So this is one of the many benefits of saunas and cold exposures. And you can do this. You can put on a continuous glucose monitor and go back and forth from a sauna to a cold plunge, and you will see that it drops your blood sugar. So there's initially a small spike, not even a spike, just a little bump, and then it goes way down. So it's just like riding a bike. It gets your heart rate up a little bit, but then your resting heart rate over time with repetition goes lower because you've adapted. By the way, we've built out basically our flagship course called Physiologic Flexibility, and this is a 3-month program that helps you fix all these little issues. So it's a protocol that will take you through ways to improve your flexibility of your pH, your oxygen, CO2, temperature, and blood sugar. Through diet, exercise, some action items like taking cold showers, for example, just one of the many things on that program. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Okay, so now, all right, you've decided to get it checked out, and then, yes, you have sleep apnea. Now what do you do? So it kind of depends on a bunch of things. Well, I mean, the best bet is to get a CPAP if you have diagnosed apnea. I would say it's mandatory. So I have a CPAP. I use it for years. Changed my life. It is a bit of a pain to travel with. There are portable ones, but I found that for me, even with my severe apnea, there's a mouthpiece by Airwave. It's a recovery one. They have different ones. That mouthpiece pushes your tongue forward. It has this little nubs on the side, on the inside, that kind of put light pressure on your tongue, and that just naturally makes your tongue go to the front of your mouth a little bit better, where it's supposed to rest, instead of falling back into your throat, where it rattles and causes the sound. So that's sort of step 1, and step 2 is tape, so mouth tape. I like hostage tape because it's if you have a beard, which I have a beard, it has no problem adhering. So that basically forces your mouth shut, so it forces you to breathe through your nose. So that combination is enough when I'm traveling. I just bring those 2 little things, and they can basically fit in the palm of your hand. I don't have to bring my CPAP around with me, which is awesome. I'll also put links to those products below in the show notes because I'm a big fan. So it's all for this week. If you think you have sleep apnea, if you wake up and your spouse is in the other bedroom, if you're falling asleep in traffic, on airplanes and buses, get it checked. This is a big deal. It's not something to joke around about. The only negative for me now is I don't fall asleep immediately on planes. But again, I don't fall asleep in traffic, so I'll take that trade-off. A ship in harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are meant to do. What does this mean? It means exposing yourself to difficult situations so you become resilient. If you need help building resilience, check out our flagship program called Physiologic Flexibility. This is a 3-month do-it-yourself program that teaches you how to maximize your homeostatic regulators, such as your pH, blood glucose, O2 and CO2 tolerance, and temperature. We give you specific action items through the program with a goal of becoming anti-fragile. If you want to become the inspiration for your friends and family, this is the program for you.